Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I was born in New York. I moved to California very, very young. Around I was 5. Went to high school. Got in a big fight with my dad, and I ended up living on the streets from the time I was 15 until I was 18. And I was a runaway. When I was 18 years old, my dad, and I graduated high school on time, thank goodness. Hey, my dad bought me a VW van for a graduation present. And after that, I went to Colorado and I lived in my van, and my van broke down, and I ended up hanging out with a bunch of Marines. Um, I joined the Marine Corps because my van broke down. And 4 years later, separated from the Marine Corps. And back then, we're talking about 1998, cell phones, there was no smartphones. There was no internet that I knew of. And from there, I went on to construction mostly. And I think a lot of people that were exiting or separating from the military forces back then, that's how it was. I mean, nowadays, everything's so connected, but back then it was very different. Uh, I went into construction. I worked way too much or really hard work. And I ended up getting bursitis in my right hip. So I wanted to get a desk job, and it really wasn't about GIS per se. It was more about something that I wouldn't have to work physically at. And I met a guy that was really a bigwig in the DOD at the time. His name was Dwight Deacon. And he found out who I was and just developed a relationship with me that was so awesome. I mean, he became like a dad, like a somebody I looked up to, a role model for me. And he ended up getting me into GIS, working with his son at a private contractor at the time, doing some work for the Navy. And I started right there, and I took a major pay cut to take that job. And I started making about, it was $12.50 an hour. They kept me on data entry, and I was copying and pasting from reports into spreadsheets. And I didn't realize what I was doing at the time. They kept me on that for 6 months, and 6 months of doing that. And I was sick of it. I was ready to throw in the towel. I had had enough of GIS, and, and then all of a sudden someone quit. And then I was all of a sudden making maps, and I found my passion. And, and prior to that, people had asked me, what is it that you like to do? And I didn't have an answer. I didn't even know what I liked to do. But when I found GIS, when I started making maps, I fell in love with cartography, and I became good at it. And, from there, I ended up making congressional maps
Mm.
they call it a withdraw, when they leave more space or they move their boundary outwards. And where I was at the time was the Naval Air Weapons Station in China Lake. And it is the biggest Navy base there is. It, and it's in the desert, surprisingly. I did it with, I did all the mapping for that withdraw, for the cutting back withdraw, they called it. And I fell in love with GIS. I fell in love with it. And every year they would send me to, Esri's user conference. And man, I'd come back with so many buttons. I'd come back with all the stuff.
Yeah.
And I just loved it. And that's how that is pretty much how I got into this career. Now I was in the Marine Corps, and you know what? I didn't learn anything about GIS. Not one thing.
When you said that your buddy had gotten you into GIS, so what's the time range there?
Oh wow. We're talking about from 1998 to
Mhm.
2010.
Okay.
Yeah. And once I started with the Navy right there, uh, in China Lake, I went on to get promotions regularly. You know, when I say GIS is my passion, I'm not kidding.
Mhm.
I live, breathe GIS, and I don't have a problem working all night.